So what is today? I think the ASC is evolved. When I was at the Institute, the ASC was a sister organisation that I respected amongst others as being a collegiate and collaborative organisation that was very much focused on technical security. If I wanted advice on technical security, that's where I would go. It has evolved now into a lot more than that. There is a lot more in terms of security and risk management, protective security, as well as cyber. We're picking up a number of cyber and IT and data protection consultants as well, which is why we are now expanding the themes of what we talk about to cover off topics that you might not have thought about, you might not have come across, but in your day-to-day consultancy work, you might get somebody asking if you know anything about this. Well, if you didn't before, you will after today. And it's not going to make you an expert, but it's going to give you food for thought to where and go and get more information, which is why we've invited 3 brilliant companies to come and support us to give their expert knowledge on the topic of travel risk management. In inviting them, I thought about the risk bow tie. Many will have heard me talk about this. I think it is the easiest way to deliver the theory of risk. And you know what they say, if you can't explain a theory to a 6-year-old, then don't tell me that you know or you are an expert in that topic. No overcomplicating things. The risk bow tie is my favorite tool, a metaphor, analogy for managing risk. So in terms of today, what I've done is I've invited an intelligence company, Sibylline, because I know their capability in deciding what are the threats and the risks of sending an employee to a country or a region. That could be UK or globally. Because the intelligence-led approach is what we're familiar with. If you're from the military or the police, it certainly is going to be very familiar to you. And sometimes in risk management strategies, you have to just don't do that thing. If you decide that sending somebody into Cartagena is too dangerous, then you have to decide in your risk management strategy that they don't go there. You have to find an alternative. But otherwise, you manage that risk the same as you would in any other way. But you have to have the information first. So that's the left side of the risk bow tie. Let me explain it very quickly if you're not familiar with it. It's a bow tie. Bow tie. The knot is a risk event. In today's event, what we're talking about is the risk from travel, kidnap, tiger kidnap, a pandemic, a volcano erupting, whatever it is. The risk event is the thing that you're trying to mitigate. To the left side, your left, my right, of the bow tie is everything, policies and procedures you can put in place for everything you can foresee being a problem and then putting something in place to mitigate that so it doesn't happen in the first place. That's the intelligence-led aspect that Sibylline will bring. Then when you're in the event, you send somebody out, then you're hoping to be able to manage them while they're there. How do you keep track of people? How do you make sure that they're not disappearing off in dangerous places and going to where they shouldn't be going, where you've told them not to go, but they're going because they're excited and whatever. Then that's people safe. People safe application is a lifetime reporting application with a 24/7 global SOC in the UK that will manage the incident in the moment. And that's the dynamic risk assessment and management of the incident. Overlying a lot of that, and then the critical response is why we invited International SOS, who I'm sure don't need any introduction, because I've been a client of International SOS. When I worked with the Foreign Office on close protection teams in Sudan, if we had a gunshot wound or a blast, we would have had access to a doctor immediately to talk us through critical care. They would have directed us to clinics that were cleared by the FCO and by International SOS to have appropriate medical care and surgeon. And if necessary, they would have flown an airframe into country with a MERT to evacuate that person, the ambassador in our case, under critical care. That's the response and the recovery aspect. but also covers a lot of other things like health and health on travel. And I think that's where they kind of overarch a lot of this. All three of these companies touch across each other's boundaries, but have a specialism. So it's like one of those overlapping circles. I forget the name of it. Dennis, help me. What's it called? Venn diagram, thank you. I looked at the academic, he singly failed me. And Gary, of all people, gave me the answer I needed. He's smarter than he looks. And so therefore, you know, in terms of what you're going to get today, you're going to get a Venn diagram of activity. But the best way to find out more about what each of them do is to go into the foyer and talk to them during the breaks. You will learn a lot more from them in the breaks. You will also learn a lot more from each other because the ASC is a collegiate network, and everybody here that I've met is more than willing to help other people for no other benefit than they've been helped themselves. So, you know, share experiences. We've got a lot of experience in the room. My own brother is down here, who is a resilience expert. We got Charlie Frank over here, whose first time come and see us, recently head of security at JCB, has a lot of experience on travel risk management. Talk to each other and swap cards and network. And if you're one of the, I guess, 30% that put their hands up, they're not a member, come and find out a bit more, get involved. Topic next meeting, the spring meeting, will be protecting publicly accessible locations. We want to have some support. That means businesses and speakers for that. So if you have something to offer in that space, please come and reach out to any of the directors or to Becky, and we will steer you in the right direction. So without further ado, I am very pleased to announce the first speaker, my friend Nick Hymans. Nick, I first met when he was at Credit Suisse, probably 12 years ago. In a senior security role, more recently at Deutsche Bank. In both roles, he's been responsible for travel risk management and employee safety. And he's going to give you a perspective from the CSO's perspective on what travel risk management does. Nick, I invite you to the stage and I hand it over to you.
Let's see if I can get this way. So, thank you very much, Rick. First of all, I'm going to start. I know you should never start anything with an apology, but I'm going to start with an apology. I've clearly been shouting at children or someone far too much, and my throat is incredibly dodgy. So if I cough, I apologize in advance. I will try and move away from the microphones so I don't deafen you all as I clear my throat. So I'm going to talk to you for the next 30 or so minutes about some of my experiences and ideas that I've had working, as Rick said, within corporate bodies, and particularly around my engagement with consultants. What I'll try and do is I'll try and give you some pointers on the sorts of things that I considered important as a client and how I would hope that any consultant coming into my organization would best help me review my excuse me, there you go, I told you, travel risk program. I appreciate that you mentioned Charlie Frank already. I know Nigel's here as well. There are representatives from other corporate security bodies within the organization. And if you feel that I've missed anything or I'm completely talking nonsense, there will be time for questions at the end. I'll mention ISO 31030 in passing, but I don't intend to go through it in too much detail. Much of what I will talk about is contained within the standard, but expressed in a slightly different format. So for those of you that are familiar with 31030, some of this may sound, well, familiar, for which I apologize, but hopefully not too much. By way of a short introduction, and I'm not going to go on about my favorite subject, me, I'm an ex-British Army officer and who my wife frequently reminds me has now spent more time out of the Army than I actually spent in it. When I left, I did spend quite a lot of time on the sell side working for providing services to clients, mainly across Africa and the Middle East, including 2 years living in Uganda, running security operations in Uganda and East Africa. On my return to the UK, I spent a short period of time working for control risks before moving across to the buy side with Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank, two systemically important financial services companies. And there, as Rick said, I ran the physical security operations, which is everything that you could imagine, and probably more. So, gates, guards and cards, building and other incident response, background screening, health and safety investigations, and, germane to today, travel risk management. I tell you this not to show off, but purely and simply to give you an idea of my credibility that I've both had to sell to corporate clients and been a corporate client on the receiving end of consultancy sales. So what I'm going to talk to you about, excuse me, this is just the world according to me. These are just my thoughts. Please don't take offense if any of these hit home too hard, but these are just how I feel, how I've come across consultancy work in the past. And quite often, my experience of consultants coming into my organization has been that they feel that corporate security teams are all the same and have the same responsibilities. Nothing could be further from the truth. Yeah, there are absolutely some core elements that are the same, at least in name anyway, but understanding the nuances in the organization will be the key to the successful delivery of a travel risk management program for your clients. I've put on the slide some examples of how you can get to know the client better. It's not an exhaustive list. Like I say, this is just my ideas. I'm sure there are loads of other ones, but I'm just going to go through these thoughts here. Does the client have a converged model, or do they still operate in an antiquated fashion in silos? Is anybody not familiar with what I mean by the term converged model? There's no judgment. Just basically what I mean by that, for the sake of absolute clarity, is are they working hand in glove with their cyber colleagues? And the reason I think that's important is because my experience has shown that organizations that are working in that fully converged or even partially converged model tend, and I'll come on to the tend bit in a second, tend to be more receptive to technical solutions, right? Which I think is a really good way of solving some of your travel risk management program problems. But it's not the end of the world if they're not fully converged. So long as they have really good relations, and I was talking about somebody about this morning, so long as they have really good relationships with the other parts of the organization that form the internal stakeholder body. So the cyber team, as I've mentioned, HR, legal, procurement, the global travel team from whom you will get most of your data on the travel risk management program, and in my eyes, most importantly, the business itself, because they're the ones that you should be doing this with. Internal responsibilities links with the above point. Who is actually responsible? And I've seen a number of different parts of the organization that are responsible for their travel risk management program. And do they own the tools? Before I left DB, I tried the Herculean task of bringing together the multiple tools that we had. We had 4 tools from 4 providers on travel risk, risk intelligence, security and medical evacuation, and mass communication. All 4 tools owned by different providers. All 4 tools owned by different parts of the bank with different budget lines and different reporting lines. So you can imagine trying to bring all those together as the individual who's responsible for travel risk management is fraught with difficulty. So even though I demonstrated operational efficiencies and cost savings of over $250,000 a year by bringing them into 2 or preferably 1 tool, the bank was still hesitant and resistant because of other internal challenges. I've put geographies and jurisdictions up there. Please excuse me if I talk about that on the next slide. I believe that it is important, but I'm going to talk about it as a subset of the whole understanding the client piece. Risk appetite. Rick alluded to this in his discussion about bow tie models and stole most of my thunder because I was going to spend quite a lot of time talking about bow tie model later on, so thanks for that, Rick. Risk appetite, I believe, is really, really important. No organisation will say, we can tolerate X losses through harm to our people as a result of business travel. But someone, somewhere within the organisation will have some form of tolerance level that they're okay to discuss. It might be corporate insurance, it might be an audit function, it might be a second line function. But it's up to you to find that out with your client that you're working with. I don't think, and again, this is just me, I don't think any organisation can have what I've seen before, which is zero appetite for travel-related events. Because if somebody's got that as a risk appetite, then they need to effectively shut down their travel, because I don't believe that you can effectively have that as a risk tolerance, or sorry, risk appetite. What I have found is that bits within the organisation that deal with enterprise risk may be better at configuring some wording that allows you to come up with an appropriate risk appetite. And one that I've seen and used is zero appetite for preventable travel incidents. Moving on to the existing program validation, there's a huge amount here that you need to, as a consultant going into an organisation, you need to understand where you can once you're in there. Please try to understand the solution that the organisation has in place already. Don't dismiss it offhand. I actually had, and I won't mention her name, but I had a consultant come in and tell me in no uncertain terms just how awful my travel risk management program was, how gapped it was, with no investigation into any of the pieces that are on this slide or the next. And as you can imagine, this didn't really endear me to her in any way, shape or form, or her organisation. I'm sure that nobody in this august audience would ever do that, ever have the audacity to come in and, even if they're thinking it very loudly, would come in and tell their client, your current solution is rubbish. But please just bear in mind that even if it is rubbish, don't tell them. Things to look for. And again, these are just some thoughts that I've had. Policies. So I had an independent travel risk management policy because of the, shall we say, vagaries of the organisation I was working for. That was then subsumed into another policy that was then subsumed into another policy. So if you were looking for my travel risk management policy, it was, I think, ultimately, eventually, 3 layers down in a procurement document. But it's a good hint for you as consultants who may be going into an organisation, if your client doesn't know, excuse me, where their policy is, then get them to look in the travel policy. Gifts and entertainments is another location that I've seen it as well. Please look for specific things in the travel risk management document. I won't call it a policy, but in the document. And I won't go through them all, but some of the key ones for me that are often missed is air concentration risk, which I really love. If you can go and talk to a client about have they got an air concentration risk element within their travel risk management policy, it immediately shows them that you know what you're talking about from a travel risk management policy, travel risk management perspective. But also think about how to extend that beyond the norm. So everybody talks about, well, not everybody, but a lot of people talk about air concentration risk. Anybody here ever talked about rail concentration risk? We had a team in Milan that went to Rome every week, once a week, a whole team, by train, because it was cheaper, it was more efficient in terms of time, and it offset some of their carbon issues as well. But nobody had thought of the impact to the organisation of having that whole team from Italy on one train going from Milan to Rome. Even if there wasn't a significant incident that occurred, what about just delays and the ability of the team to perform whilst they're on that train? I alluded to providers and integrations. It seems obvious to all of us in this room, who are all professionals in the space, but every time you migrate data from one tool to another, like the 4 tools I was talking about earlier on, there is the possibility of data corruption as it goes from one tool to another, particularly in the middle of an incident when people are under stress and time is of the essence. If you can recommend a reduction in the number of tools that your client is using, they will love you for 2 reasons. First of all, the operational efficiency, and secondly, the cost efficiency. I was talking to a fellow corporate security director at another bank last week, and he told me that his budget had never been challenged in the 10 years that he was at the helm. I was extremely skeptical, and if it's true, I would say that he is a complete anomaly, as most other teams I speak to always are under budgetary pressure. Every so often, there is a terribly sad event, such as the assassination of Brian Thompson that took place in December last year. And that will galvanize the organization for a short period of time into doing something about that particular risk. But, sadly, corporate memories are very short for this sort of thing, and anything that you can do to demonstrate a cost saving for the organization will, excuse me, while not compromising the operational efficiency or the program itself, will likely be well received. I spoke about this earlier and I said I'd return to it. The environment, I do view this as a subset of getting to know the client. But I broke it out here just to reinforce the point that no 2 organizations that you will be going into as a consultant are the same. Different geographies, different industries, even different stages of development of an organization can significantly impact their TRM program. For example, take the financial services, which I have a little bit of understanding of. Take 3 random letters from the alphabet, any 3, throw them at a wall, and you've got a regulator that is looking at that particular organization. The PRA, the FSA, the SEC, MAS, ECB, BaFin, FINMA. I know the last 2 have got 5, but work with me here. The point is, each of these regulators may have their own view on the specific elements that will impact a TRM program. Different industries will also have different regulators, different focuses. Nigel, who is here, was at BP, and he and I have discussed this on a number of occasions. BP and the extractive sector have a very different focus on safety and security than the banking sector, probably because they have a lot more machinery with sharp edges that spin fast than we do. But understanding that as a consultant going into the organization, understanding the environment that you're going into will hugely develop your credibility with the client from the outset. I've put legislation up here. I'm not going to go through all of the legislation because there's tons of it, but the Health and Safety at Work Act, Corporate Manslaughter Act from the UK, DORA from the EU, not the Explorer for those of you that have small kids. The client may not be a lawyer. They may not know of all the legislation that impacts them in their particular field. They may have access to corporate lawyers, but if you can go in and help them understand that environment, that legislative framework within which they have to work, again, it's just helping you demonstrate your credibility to them. And I put standards here because of ISO 30, primarily because of ISO 31030. And the developments that are coming down the convening track, which I'm not going to talk to. But please, please, please do not go into your clients and tell them that 31030 is a must-have. The number of providers that have tried to convince me to get certified to 31,030 or certified against 31,030 is crazy. If you have a client who has even a vague understanding of the area, and you have to assume that they will have some measure of understanding, telling them that they have to get certified against an uncertifiable standard immediately blows you out of the water. So this is where I'm going to castigate Rick. Just for you. Please excuse the Nick aged 2.5 type diagram, but I couldn't do any better. Rick and I have been talking about the bow tie model, and I thought, oh, I'll just suck up to him a bit and put it up here. Again, I couldn't work the integrated piece, so some of the bits are a little bit out of where they should be on the diagram. But again, if you work with me, hopefully it'll all become clear. I would suggest that most people here will be dealing with clients from all ends of the travel risk management spectrum. Those who have never heard of 31,030, can't even spell ISO at one end, all the way through to those who may have been on convening programs with the BSI, with the ISO, et cetera, and everywhere in between. No matter what their level of knowledge is, the key for me is that you as consultants, and I apologize, I'm talking primarily to the consultants in the room, are trying to make those corporate clients' life better and easier. One of the easiest ways to do that is to break down the thorny issue of travel risk management, which they don't necessarily understand because they've got you in the first place, into easily digestible elements. I know, again, it sounds self-evident, but doing so helps them internally as well. Remember, you're not the only people who have to sell your services. They, and I as a corporate entity, I'm selling services as well. My stakeholders are just slightly different. I've still got to sell my services internally within the organization. I could spend quite a lot of time on this slide alone, but I'm going to limit it to a couple of points. The first point should actually be called intelligence and preparation. Now, I know colleagues from Sibylline are going to talk about the geopolitical piece, so I won't mention that at all. But it's not just about understanding that element. Getting the client to understand the micro environment as well is equally important. Everything from the method of ground transportation, whether it's a car, train, as I've already spoken about, and how it's booked, all the way through to accommodation. And I use the word accommodation advisedly, although a number of big, large firms will still use hotels. A lot of smaller firms are using the shared economy, Uber, Lyft, and in this particular instance, Airbnb. This has to be specified in the policy I mentioned above. Can they use the shared economy? Can they use it everywhere? Are there geographical restrictions? And if the policy says they can't use it, is this communicated to the traveller and enforced? I've seen policies that clearly ban the use of Airbnb and Uber, yet the organisation has no mechanism in place for enforcing the ban. I was at an event with Paul yesterday. Sorry to name drop you without warning, Paul. I was at an event yesterday with Paul, and someone came up with a really good solution for this, which I put to you now for your own use as you see fit, which is to get the client to link expenses to travel authorization. So if the traveller is booking out of policy in Airbnb or with Uber, their expenses will not get paid. It's a really good way of hitting travellers in the pocket, which is sometimes the only place that they understand the pain to come from. My own personal current crusade revolves around individual risk assessments. I've spoken about this to anybody that will listen, and some that don't necessarily want to listen. at GBTA's conference last year, another event at the tail end of last year. I've got a podcast on it coming up as well. I'm not advertising that. I'm just saying that to emphasize quite how important I think this is. An organization can potentially have thousands of unique travelers every year. And despite the, shall we say, current moves in the US to reduce the emphasis on individuality, let's just call it that, I don't think the rest of the world has any intent on catching up, at least not immediately, and to the same extent. This means that travelers' nationality, skin tone, creed, sexuality, even employer can have an impact on the risk that they may face when traveling. So, as an example, when I was at Credit Suisse, and this would have been about 2008, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, so I couldn't remember his name, who was one of the sons of the dictator, was desperately trying to bring Libya back from its status as an international pariah. And he was doing a really good job. His brother, unfortunately, was a really nasty piece of work, who played football semi-professionally, played in Switzerland, lost the match, and went back to his hotel and beat up a member of his hotel staff so badly that he put her in hospital. The Swiss authorities took a very dim view of this, understandably, and before he could claim diplomatic immunity, they threw him in jail, and then PNG'd him, threw him out of the country. There followed a series of tit-for-tat exchanges between Libya and Switzerland. The reason why I'm telling you this story is what it meant was colleagues from Morgan Stanley, Barclays, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, all of the other financial services houses that I was working very closely with were going in and out of Tripoli. It was a very benign operating environment with no protection measures whatsoever. Because I worked for a Swiss firm, we couldn't send anybody in. So just an example of how even your employer's nationality can impact excuse me, the pre-travel risk for travellers. I think, having looked at the attendee list, there may be a couple of specialist training providers in the room. I'm not going to ask you to identify yourselves, but I would encourage anybody talking to clients to try and integrate some form of training into your program. Please note, it can't be as long as you would like it to be, okay? Speaking from my own personal experience, and this is outside of my job, there are so many mandatory compliance trainings that organizations have to, or people in the organization have to go through, that adding another one, people will pay lip service. I'm not proud of this particular example that I'll give you, but there was one mandatory compliance training that I did, and as an exercise, I didn't read the text. I went straight through to the pass-fail questions at the end. When I got to the pass-fail questions, I didn't even read the text of the questions. I just went to the multiple choice answers and managed to pass the course just based on the answers. Now, that's not a good indication as to the level of training that I was receiving from that particular course, but what you have to do is balance getting the training points across in as short a period of time as you can to allow the individuals who are doing it to get on with their job, which is making money for the organization. So please, if you're involved in training, keep it short. I spoke about, excuse me, moving to the other side, or kind of the middle, although it's up on the other side, and like I said, I apologize for that. I spoke earlier about the organization's travel risk management policy, and two elements that I've seen increasing in importance are digital nomadsy and leisure. Now, I know that some people in the audience may take significant umbrage with either or both of those terms, and I apologize. I think they are around for the foreseeable future. I think that the travel risk management policy absolutely has to include them, or at least the client's attitude towards them. Are they tolerated? Are they not tolerated? And what are the business implications? One of the biggest implications for particularly leisure is, where does the corporate liability stop and the individual liability start? and this is particularly around insurance. I went to Kenya about 2 years ago. I went to Kenya. We had an office there. We had some hotels to review. I was going there on leisure travel, so I tagged that onto the start. And as an experiment, I went into the organization and said, whose responsibility is it? Where does yours, Deutsche Bank's responsibility, start and then stop, and mine as a personal individual start and stop? So getting the client to understand this is key to success in that area. I've put driving up there because I think it's something that is often overlooked, and it is the clients quite often see their responsibilities end when the traveller is in location, in accommodation, in the office, whatever it is. And I think this is particularly prevalent, or pertinent rather, for returning local nationals. So a South African working in London, going to Johannesburg, self-driving. I've been talking, and I say this with a certain amount of distaste, to a number of lawyers, I apologise if there are any in the room, about case law and how case law is beginning to suggest that allowing people to self-drive when they've come off a long-haul flight could, and if there's an incident, could result in a negative impact to the organisation and a case being brought against the employer. Finally, for the during the trip element, I've put up there incident management. There are some amazing vendors in the marketplace. Rick's spoken about some of them. Some of them are in the room, and I won't mention any names. And they've got stellar capabilities. My own experience is to always have a plan B. I'm a proud Irishman, so I think I can say this without fear of discrimination. Murphy's Law suggests that whatever can go wrong will go wrong. And so, yes, have faith in the capabilities of your providers, but always have a plan B if you can. And what about post-trip? I put it up there because I think it's really, really important and quite frequently overlooked by many organizations. It's a great and very easy way of fostering relationships with the organization's traveling population. I get that volume of travel may be an issue, and maybe you don't need to have post-trip discussions with people who are going from London to Munich or Frankfurt to New York, or simple low-risk travel such as that. But especially for travel to higher risk locations where perhaps some security measures have been put in place to facilitate the travel, I think, as I said, it's a really good way of fostering a relationship with that client. How was the hotel? How was the journey management provider? The ground transportation? Were there any issues? It provides a great set of unofficial quality assurance. Again, take it with a pinch of salt, because travellers, particularly banking travellers, will always whinge and complain about the fact that they didn't get this class of Mercedes or that level of series of BMW. I'm sadly not joking. But it's a great rough and ready indicator of the status. And finally, from me, before I open the floor, I've put on there risk treatment. And Rick alluded to this at the start. Like I said, I should really have conferred with him in greater detail because he stole quite a lot of my thunder. But that's fine. We'll talk about that afterwards. I've put risk treatment on there rather than risk mitigation, because I think quite often organizations reach straight away for the mitigation rather than the treatment or other methods of treating a risk. Excuse me. Rather than going straight for mitigation. And that's something that you, as consultants in the risk space, can educate your clients on. And Rick, if it's okay there, I'm conscious of time, so I'll pause and open the floor to you to any questions.
Please just raise a hand, and we don't have roving mics, but it's quite a quiet room. So anybody got any questions? obviously after lunch we will have a panel discussion about everything we've talked about today. So if there's something that you've come up with later, then you can raise it within the panel discussion. But
thank you, Nick. I just wondered whether you had any good ways of measuring how effective the travel risk management programme is once it's in place, and if so,
So it's a fantastic question, and it's one that is pulling together quite a lot of brain power, not mine. So there's a guy called Jorge Mesa who sits with me on the GBTA EMEA Risk Committee, and he actually has posed this very question to industry. There is no established mechanism that I'm aware of for measuring return on investment, but it's something that we're looking at. There's a number of models that are beginning to surface. For me, personally, as a director in the space, I would suggest that the best way is client satisfaction. No noise isn't always good, but like I said, going back to that post-trip interrogation of the individuals and understanding from them where there were issues, what those issues were, and if there weren't any issues, great. But you've got to have that interaction with them to determine whether there is good return. It was a great question, thank you.
Anybody else?